It started with dinner, like so many of our arguments did. Something about the way I folded the napkins, or maybe the fact I didn't fold them at all. I don't even remember the spark, just the fire that followed. She was across from me, arms crossed like she was holding in something volcanic, face pinched in that way that told me nothing I said would land right. I stayed calm, like I always did. I asked what was wrong, offered to fix whatever I'd missed. That's when she dropped it. "Love shouldn't feel like a debt," she said flatly, prodding at her plate like it had offended her. "I shouldn't have to keep paying you back just to be in this relationship." The words didn't hit me right away. They hung in the air, sharp-edged but dull from overuse, like a knife that couldn't decide if it wanted to cut or bruise. I blinked, tried to absorb it, tried to decide if she meant it, or if it was just another one of those things people say when they want to hurt, and still keep the upper hand. I told her I wasn't keeping score, that I didn't do things for her expecting anything in return. That's when she laughed. Not loud, not cruel, just that dry, dismissive huff that always made me feel small. She called me dramatic, and went back to eating. I didn't touch my food. My appetite was gone. What bothered me wasn't just the sentence, it was the tone, the ease. Like she'd been waiting to say it, like it had been sitting on her tongue for weeks, and I couldn't stop replaying it. Love shouldn't feel like a debt. I used to think our disagreements were just friction. Every couple has them. She liked things a certain way, and I tried to meet her there. She got overwhelmed at work, I gave space. She forgot things, I covered. She vented, I listened. I adjusted. Quietly, without complaint. But that sentence made it clear. She didn't see my care as love. She saw it as obligation. A tally in some invisible spreadsheet she resented having to look at. And if she saw me as a creditor, what did that make her? That night, after she fell asleep on the couch like she often did these days, I sat in our bedroom and stared at nothing for a long time. I wasn't angry. Not yet. I just felt the floor shifting. Like something basic had cracked underneath what I thought we were building. She said love shouldn't be a debt. But maybe she'd been writing off our connection like a lost column for months. Maybe she'd been cashing in, not investing. Maybe I was just the last one to notice. I didn't confront her the next morning. I made her coffee, same as always, kissed her forehead while she scrolled through her phone, barely noticing. But something in me had already gone still. A quiet accounting had begun, and this time, I'd be the one doing the math. It was small things at first, little moments that didn't register until they started forming a pattern, like drops of water in a bucket you don't notice until it overflows. She asked me to pick up her dry cleaning on a Thursday afternoon. Not unusual. I was already on the way back from a meeting. I texted her after I grabbed it. All set. No reply. I got home, hung it up, and she walked right past it. No glance. No thank you. Just a quick, "Did you remember the oat milk too?" Like I was the assistant she couldn't fire. The next day, she was late for work and couldn't find her charger. I handed her mine, the one I always kept next to my side of the bed. She took it without looking, muttered something that might have been gratitude, and rushed out the door. I stood in the hallway for a long time after she left, charger cord dangling from my fingers. That empty kind of silence where you realize you've been giving in ways the other person stopped noticing long ago. By the end of that week, I started counting. Not because I wanted to, but because I couldn't not. She needed me to check on the leaking faucet, and I did. She needed help organizing her presentation deck, and I stayed up until 1 a.m. with her. She asked me to remind her about her mom's birthday, and I set 3 calendar alerts. I adjusted, I showed up. And in return? Silence. Assumptions. A growing impatience anytime I needed anything in return. One night, I asked her to pick up dinner because I had a long day and barely had time to breathe. She agreed but came home empty-handed. Said she forgot, and offered me a protein bar from her bag like I was a vending machine that ran on scraps. I didn't say anything then either. I just watched her collapse on the couch, turn on some reality show, and scroll through her phone. Her eyes never met mine. She didn't ask about my day, didn't notice I hadn't eaten, didn't notice that I had stopped offering pieces of myself on demand. The next morning, she complained about feeling drained, said she needed more support. I nodded. I asked what she needed. She listed things, appointments, errands, reminders, and I wrote them down like I always did. But in my head, the list was different. It wasn't her needs. It was her withdrawals, one after another, never matched, never repaid. I kept imagining a bank account with my name on it, drained slowly over time, never replenished. She didn't notice. Or maybe she did, and she didn't care. And still, when she leaned her head against my shoulder that night and sighed, I stayed still. I didn't pull away. I didn't speak. I just sat there, the warmth of her fading fast, and thought to myself, this isn't connection. This is consumption. It wasn't just the silence anymore. It was what filled the silence. I brought home her favorite pastries one morning, a small peace offering, maybe, or just a reflex from an older version of us. She barely glanced at the box before saying, "That's a lot of sugar." "No thank you." No smile. Just an offhand nutritional audit, like affection now had a calorie count. Later that week, I texted her while I was stuck in traffic. "Thinking about you." I meant it. It wasn't performative. Just a small reminder in a day filled with gray noise. She didn't respond until 3 hours later with a single emoji. The thumbs up one. Cold and personal. Like a company acknowledgement email. That same night I made dinner. She'd been slammed with back-to-back calls, and I figured maybe this could reset something. I made the pasta she used to ask for. Set the table. Lit the candles we hadn't used in months. She walked in, looked around, and raised an eyebrow. "What's all this?" The tone wasn't curious. It was wary. I told her I thought she could use a break, that I wanted to do something nice. She laughed. A short, tired laugh. "You really don't have to try so hard, you know. It's a little much." I said nothing, but that sentence burned longer than it should have. A little much. Like kindness had become excessive. Like care needed trimming. The pattern grew clearer. When I made plans, she called it needy. When I suggested a weekend away, just the two of us, she said it sounded suffocating. When I asked if she wanted to come with me to a work dinner, she said, "Do I have to?" And when I said no, she took that as freedom, not invitation. There was no fight. No loud conflict. Just dismissal. Cold, casual dismissal. And the worst part? I still hoped she'd notice. That maybe it was stress, or burnout, or something temporary we just have to weather. But the tone was consistent. The smirks when I offered anything sincere. The rolled eyes when I tried to check in. The way she made affection feel like a performance she was too evolved to participate in. And still, I gave. I asked. I planned. She ignored, minimized, mocked. I wasn't chasing affection anymore. I was just trying to remember what it felt like to be received without ridicule. To offer without being made to feel small for caring. That night, as she scrolled past me on the couch, tossing her legs over the armrests like she lived alone, I stared at the ceiling and let the words echo back. Love shouldn't feel like a debt. No, it shouldn't. But mockery? Dismissal? Constant rejection dressed as independence? That wasn't freedom. That was foreclosure. And she was putting a lock on every door I once thought was ours. I didn't expect her to brag about it. But that's exactly what she did, at a dinner with her friend Kelsey, of all people. We were seated in a cramped booth, cheap votive candles flickering between drink glasses, when she tilted her head, laughed, and said it. "He's useful when I'm tired of doing everything myself," she joked, gesturing toward me with her glass. Kelsey gave a quick, uneasy laugh and looked at me like she wasn't sure if she was supposed to. I didn't laugh. I didn't even smile. I just stared at the water rings on the table, letting the word settle. Useful. That was the word she picked. Not supportive. Not dependable. Not loving. Useful. I looked up slowly, just to see if she'd register the blow, but she was already scanning the dessert menu like the conversation had never happened. Like I was a feature, not a person. Like I wasn't sitting 6 inches away trying to steady my breathing. It wasn't a one-off. In the car afterward, she asked if I could swing by the pharmacy on the way home. No mention of dinner. No thanks for paying the bill. No follow-up to the invisible punch she'd thrown between the appetizers and her smugness. She was relaxed, humming along to the radio, as if everything were fine. I drove in silence, nodding to myself more than to her. Not because I was angry, though anger was coming, but because I finally saw it clearly. This wasn't about love growing cold. It was about how she'd reframed me in her mind. I was the guy who got things done. The man who made her life smoother. A built-in assistant who knew her preferences, scheduled her appointments, and remembered her family's birthdays better than she did. I was useful. And worse, she thought saying that out loud, in public, counted as affection. It wasn't love. It was convenience, poorly disguised as companionship. That night, I sat in the kitchen long after she went to bed. No lights, just the fridge hum and the tick of the wall clock. I replayed that dinner in my mind. Her tone, Kelsey's glance, my own silence. I wasn't a man to her anymore. I was a service, and she didn't even notice she'd said it. Didn't realize, or didn't care, that she'd exposed more truth in one casual sentence than she had in months of performative smiles. I didn't confront her. I didn't bring it up the next morning. I poured her coffee, left it by her keys, and kissed the top of her head as she breezed past. But I was no longer listening to her words. I was listening to the subtext, and I was beginning to realize how deep the overdraft had gone. It hit me one Wednesday evening while she scrolled through her phone, sitting opposite me at the kitchen island. I asked how her meeting went. She mumbled something about it being fine, and then returned her focus to a reel of someone cooking lasagna. She hadn't asked about my day in weeks, maybe longer. I sat with that. Let it weigh me down until it started to feel familiar, like a second skin. I thought about the hours I'd spent planning surprises she barely acknowledged. The late nights I'd stayed up listening to her vent while ignoring my own exhaustion. The favors, the errands, the emotional labor she never recognized but always expected. And the more I thought about it, the clearer it became. I wasn't her partner. I was her subscription. A paid service she never questioned, one that auto-renewed each month without her having to lift a finger. Except the price wasn't money. It was my energy, my time, my presence. And lately, I was overdrawing my emotional reserves just to keep up. She showed up when something was in it for her. When she needed someone to vent to, a ride to the airport, someone to handle the things she didn't want to think about. I was dependable. That was my role. But when I was low, she disappeared. When I was quiet, she filled the space with distractions. When I needed connection, she offered performance. We used to talk at night, really talk. Now, she fell asleep to podcasts about productivity while I stared at the ceiling and counted the hours I hadn't truly been seen. One evening, I tested something. I told her I was feeling off, burned out, that I hadn't been sleeping well. She blinked, said, "You should try melatonin," and went back to scrolling. That was it. No hand on my shoulder. No curiosity. No warmth. Just a recommendation like I was asking for a restaurant, not revealing the cracks in my spirit. I didn't push. I didn't guilt her. But I knew. I wasn't being loved. I was being used, and not even maliciously. Just, automatically. Like I'd made it too easy to lean on me and too costly to look in my direction unless she needed something. That night, I pulled out my old notebook. I hadn't written in it in months. I didn't write feelings. I wrote facts, dates, observations, things she asked for, things she forgot, things she dismissed. The ledger was starting to form in my mind, and I realized something brutal. She wasn't taking advantage of me. She just assumed I'd always be there. That was her mistake. And now, it was becoming mine, if I stayed. A week later, I was helping a colleague at work, Mark, a guy I barely knew outside of morning nods and the occasional shared elevator silence. His father had been hospitalized, and he was drowning under missed deadlines and worry he didn't know how to carry. I offered to take one of his accounts off his plate for a few days. Nothing major. Just a gesture. The next morning, he stopped by my office and stood awkwardly in the doorway, holding a coffee. "I don't know how to thank you," he said. "That kind of help, you didn't have to. But you did." He meant it. You could feel it in the pause between his words, the way his voice caught slightly like it had been a hard week. That coffee? Probably cost $5. But the gratitude behind it? That stayed with me all day. And all night. I walked through our front door later, carrying takeout because she texted me 30 minutes before saying she didn't feel like cooking. I handed her the bag, and she barely looked up. No thanks, no acknowledgement. Just opened it, made a face, and said, "Ugh, did they forget the extra sauce?" I didn't answer. I just sat down across from her and watched her eat like I wasn't there. That's when it hit me. The difference between Mark and her wasn't just gratitude. It was presence. It was recognition. He saw me. He understood what the gesture meant. She didn't. Or maybe she did, and it just didn't matter anymore. Because when someone's used to you being the constant, they stop checking if you're still choosing to be. I excused myself after dinner. Said I had emails to catch up on. She didn't ask what kind. Didn't look up. Just mumbled something and turned the TV louder. Back in the spare room, My room now, more often than not, I sat with that moment in Mark's doorway. His awkward thank you, his sincere eyes. That was what appreciation looked like, and I realized how starved I'd been of it in my own home. How long I'd been serving someone who no longer even saw the plate. I wasn't looking for medals, I wasn't keeping score. But I couldn't keep giving from a well she never even checked was still full. The imbalance wasn't new. But now, it was undeniable. And I wasn't angry. I was just done rationing my self-worth into pieces small enough to swallow without complaint. She thought my love was automatic, something that replenished on its own. But even the sun sets eventually, and I was already turning toward the door, quietly, strategically, before she even realized the room had grown dark. I sat down one Sunday morning with a blank sheet of paper and a black pen. No emotions. No metaphors. Just 2 columns. Left side, what I give. Right side, what I receive. I didn't start with dramatic items. I listed the practical ones first. Errands, bills I handled without being asked, chores I completed even when it wasn't my turn. Then came the quieter ones, the way I remembered her schedule better than she did. The way I made space for her moods without taking offense. The way I paused my own frustrations when she was tired or overwhelmed. The list kept growing. On the right side, I stared at the space for a long time. Then slowly, hesitantly wrote, "She used to laugh at my jokes." Then I crossed it out. It didn't feel honest. Not anymore. I sat there, pen in hand, long after the ink had dried. Not because I expected perfect balance. I didn't need symmetry. I just needed something. A sign that love was still a living thing between us. Not a routine. Not a set of expectations I was fulfilling by habit. The right side of the page stayed mostly blank. It wasn't about money. It never had been. It was about energy, attention, thoughtfulness. Things that couldn't be bought or measured, but you knew when they were missing. I tried to recall the last time she touched my arm just to be close. The last time she asked me how I was, really asked, not out of obligation. The last time she sat across from me and looked at me like she used to. When we were new and everything felt electric. The silence of those memories told me more than any argument ever could. That night she asked if I could help fix her printer. I said I would. But I didn't get up immediately. I waited. Looked at her. Asked, "Do you even know what I do at work?" She blinked. "What? Do you know what I'm working on this week?" She paused, trying to recall. "Something with client reports? Close. But not close enough." And the way her face shifted, half annoyed, half defensive, told me she realized it too. I nodded slowly. "Never mind. I'll check the printer." She didn't stop me. Didn't follow. And I didn't expect her to. But in that quiet hallway, walking toward yet another task she'd never thanked me for, I knew something had shifted permanently. I was no longer hoping she'd change. I was documenting what wouldn't. I didn't announce it. I didn't slam doors or make declarations. I just stopped. Stopped volunteering for the invisible work. Stopped anticipating her needs before she even voiced them. Stopped initiating small kindnesses that had long gone unnoticed. Refilling her water bottle before bed. Warming her car on cold mornings. Sending midday texts to check in. At first, she didn't notice. Then came the questions. "You didn't remind me about my appointment this morning?" she asked one Tuesday, a hint of irritation in her voice, like I'd forgotten a role she never acknowledged I had. I replied calmly, "I assumed you had it on your calendar." She blinked, frowned slightly. "I do. You always remind me." I shrugged. "Thought you had it covered." No edge in my voice. No heat. Just factual detachment. She tried again 2 days later. "You haven't been making coffee lately. I figured we could take turns." She hesitated before nodding. "Sure. That's fair." But it wasn't about fairness. It was about clarity. About seeing how much I'd been subsidizing the illusion of balance. When I stopped patting the corners of her life, the sharp edges returned fast, and she didn't like it. Her reactions weren't worried. They were annoyed. She wasn't concerned about me, just frustrated at the change in her comfort. One night, I declined to fund a last-minute trip she wanted to take with friends. She brought it up casually, assuming I'd say yes like I always had. I looked at the numbers, calmly. "We'll need to plan ahead for that. It's not in the budget right now." She stared at me like I'd spoken in another language. "Seriously?" I nodded once. "Yeah, seriously." She scoffed, pushed her chair back, and walked out of the room. No attempt to discuss. Just pure offense that the answer wasn't automatic. That was the moment I realized she didn't miss me. She missed the version of me who required nothing. The one who filled in every gap, absorbed every inconvenience, and made her life smoother without drawing attention to the cost. But I was done handing out interest-free loans of my time and energy, done covering emotional charges she never acknowledged. She still hadn't asked why I'd changed. She only asked why her conveniences were disappearing. And the more irritated she grew, the quieter I became. I wasn't trying to teach her a lesson. I was just gathering my final data points before I closed the account for good. The first shift came through her tone, wrapped in something that sounded like concern but wore the wrong shoes. Guilt, not grace. She waited until we were brushing our teeth one night, standing side by side in front of the mirror like we used to. She stared at her reflection more than at me and said, "You've been distant lately. Are you mad at me?" I kept brushing, rinsed, and answered evenly. "Not mad. Just adjusting." Her eyebrows pulled in, uncertain. "Adjusting to what?" "To what's real," I said simply. "To how things are now." She laughed once, sharp, defensive. "That sounds rehearsed." I didn't respond. I'd spent months parsing words. She could sit in the silence for once. Over the next week, her behavior turned erratic in that calculated way some people confuse with emotion. She cooked dinner one night, twice in a row, actually. Kissed me on the cheek while I worked. Suggested a movie I liked, curled next to me on the couch like we never drifted. But none of it felt anchored. It felt performed. Like someone realizing their free ride was at risk and slapping on charm like it could patch a sinking boat. When I didn't mirror her enthusiasm, she switched lanes fast. "You're cold," she told me one morning, wrapping her arms around herself like I'd left her out in the wind. "It's like you're someone else." I looked up from my coffee. "Maybe you're just seeing me without all the extras." Her expression hardened. "So what? I'm not enough now." That was the moment she flipped the script, painted my withdrawal as betrayal. Said I was changing, distant, unfair. That I was keeping score. That line again, like she hadn't long ago declared love shouldn't feel like a debt. She told her friends too. I knew because Kelsey stopped texting me, and another mutual friend unfollowed me on social media. Subtle signals that the story was out. He's not the man she married. But those same friends had sat through dinners where she rolled her eyes at my jokes, ignored my questions, dismissed my gestures. They'd seen it. They just didn't want to confront it. That was fine. I wasn't interested in defending myself to anyone. My goal wasn't revenge or vindication. It was clarity. And now, with the guilt trips mounting and her sudden affection feeling more like a tactic than a choice, I was clearer than ever. She wasn't trying to reconnect. She was trying to reset the equation where I gave endlessly, and she skimmed from the surface without ever dipping in herself. But I wasn't accepting that balance anymore. And I wasn't explaining myself to a woman who only noticed I was gone when I stopped doing the work she never thanked me for. She was gone when I did it, out running errands, I think, or maybe meeting one of the friends who still believed I was the problem. The house was quiet in that way only deliberate decisions make it. No music, no news. Just the slow tick of the hallway clock I'd fixed 3 times, and the steady beat of my own heartbeat, no longer racing. I didn't pack loudly. I didn't rush. Every movement was measured clean. Just the essentials, a few bags, some documents, the things that were mine. I left the joint items, the blender, the couch, the framed prints we picked out together but she'd come to criticize as too sentimental. I didn't care to argue ownership anymore. On the kitchen table, I placed the note. Not long, not bitter, just clear. Love isn't a loan, either. No more interest. No more penalties. Account closed. I stared at it for a long moment before stepping back. The pen still sat beside it, uncapped. I thought about underlining account closed, but it didn't need emphasis. The silence would say it better than ink ever could. Before leaving, I walked through each room, not to say goodbye, but to make sure there was nothing left of me she could pretend still belonged. I checked the drawer where I used to keep little things for her, spare headphones, a note she wrote me once during a hard week. I left that drawer empty. The front door clicked softly behind me. No slam. No drama. Just closure. I didn't drive off immediately. I sat in the car, hands on the wheel, watching the house that once held plans and laughter and late-night dancing in the kitchen. I used to love the way the porch light made everything feel warm. Now it just looked like a spotlight on a stage we both stopped performing on long ago. I imagined her coming home, seeing the note, scanning the empty space where my bag usually sat. I wondered how long it would take her to feel the silence, not just hear it, but feel it, to understand that this time, it wasn't a mood or a message. It was final. I started the car, and for the first time in months, I didn't feel hollow. I felt light. Not happy. Not relieved. Just weightless. Love should never feel like debt. And I had just cleared mine completely. The calls started that night, 11 missed, each one later than the last. I watched the screen light up again and again from the guest room of my brother's place. I didn't answer. Not out of spite, but because there was nothing left to say that hadn't already been ignored. By morning, the texts came. Not apologies. Not introspection. Just confusion masked as concern. Where are you? This isn't like you. We need to talk. Then, an hour later. You're being unfair. Cruel. That word stuck with me, not because it was true, but because of what it revealed. In her world, my absence was betrayal. But her months of withdrawal, dismissal, and quiet devaluation, those were just normal. She called Kelsey. I knew because Kelsey texted me once. She's a mess. I've never seen her like this. I didn't reply. Then came the guilt-ridden messages. I just wish you told me things were this bad. As if I hadn't. As if silence wasn't my final language after every other one failed. She tried everything. Sweetness. Tears. Nostalgia. Remember when we… Panic. Accusation. You just walked out. Flattery even. No one does the things you did. No one else ever will. But that was the truth buried in the plea, wasn't it? No one else ever will. Because I had. I did. I showed up. I gave. I adjusted. And she withdrew. She'd always assumed my love would renew itself, like a monthly draft from an account with no limit. She never imagined I'd stop funding her comfort, stop underwriting her half-hearted efforts. But now she was cold, and out of credit. I heard from mutual friends that she'd been talking, to anyone who'd listen, about how I changed, how I gave up, about how I was the quiet one, so it came out of nowhere. Except it didn't. Not to anyone who'd been watching closely. Not to those who'd seen her brush off my attempts, laugh at my gifts, shrink from every real moment that asked for effort. She was in emotional bankruptcy. Not because I left, but because she'd been overspending connection long before I closed the account. And now she had to sit in the silence she never thought would be permanent. Because this time, I wasn't coming back.